الجبال وترى الأرض بارزة وحشرناهم فلم نغادر منهم أحدا وعرضوا على ربك صفا لقد جئتمونا كما خلقناكم أول مرة بل زعمتم أن لن
Ladies and gentlemen, we are waiting for other speakers to arrive who's been very busy to attend other negotiation sessions. So please bear with us a little bit more. We will start soon. Thank you. Very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this side event. This is Uju Kim from the Secretariat of the UNFCCC. I would like to start this event by introducing our speaker for opening remark, Mr. James Grabert, Director of Mitigation Division from the UNFCCC Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Uju. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be here on behalf of the UNFCCC to welcome you to this side event today. As the science clearly is indicating to all of us, the world is facing an emergency. It's an existential crisis. We've been talking about that for some time. And it clearly requires the best efforts of all segments of society and economies to take more ambitious climate action and to do so as rapidly as possible. The Paris Agreement set out the goal to limit temperature increase. Closer, sorry about that. Oh, okay. To limit our temperature increase to 1.5 degrees or as close to, as low as possible from 2 degrees. In the years since Paris, the science is becoming increasingly clear that immediate action is needed to avert the worst impacts of climate change. The IPCC Working Group 3 report is very clear. Greenhouse gas emissions need to fall by 43% by the end of this decade, a mere 8 years away, if we're going to stay on track for 1.5. In contrast, the UNFCCC NDC synthesis report, which we presented last month, showed global emissions are on track to decrease by only 0.3% by 2030 compared to 2010 levels, so we're quite a ways off. A year ago, the Glasgow Climate Pact highlighted the importance of long-term strategies and called for parties to submit their long-term strategies towards just transition to net zero emissions by or around mid-century, and regularly update those in line with the best available science. It also noted the importance of aligning NDCs with those long-term strategies. As of yesterday, we received 56 long-term strategies covering 65 parties, including 7 updates. COP27 set out a new direction for a new era of implementation where outcomes from the formal and informal process truly begin to come together to drive the greater climate progress. This is why it is essential to develop and implement ambitious long-term strategies and nationally determined contributions. Both of these will provide momentum to the process and set the trajectories that need to be met to keep Paris Agreement temperature goals within reach. The parties communicated long-term strategies. They account for 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions, 80% of global GDP, and 70% of total energy consumption. So the long-term strategies combined send a clear signal to the direction of the global shift. One of the key findings from our synthesis report on long-term strategies, which we published also last month, is the urgency of actions in this decade to achieve the long-term goal. Many parties are proactively seeking to capitalize opportunities arising from the global shift to a low-emission economy. Global transition towards net zero emissions will involve structural shift of economies and create opportunities for new development models, technologies, and sustainable finance. This unprecedented shift will open new markets, create new jobs, and kickstart the massive shift throughout all sectors that is so urgently needed. Robust planning and implementation requires inputs, actions, and collaboration with all stakeholders. So we prepared this side event to showcase the efforts of parties and development partners to develop and implement ambitious long-term strategies which simultaneously contribute to sustainable development benefits. I hope you will find this side event useful, and I look forward to our discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Now, let me introduce Ms. Jennifer Baum-Wohl from UNDP. She's Global Climate Change Specialist and Global Coordinator for Climate Promise. She will share with us on building the future of development, an overview of the LEDS landscape. Please, Jennifer, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, colleagues. It's wonderful to be here. So I will, with thanks to James for starting us off here and giving a bit of the history and where we stand on the LTS, LT-LEDs. I'm going to give a bit of a scene setting in terms of what we're seeing and how the LT-LEDs work is really aligning and providing a platform for the development planning support. Coming from UNDP, the perspective that we take is really that this LT-LEDs and of course the NDC work alongside it is the platform for us to be able to look towards the development pathways that help us to align with Paris Agreement, but also, of course, with the 2030 agenda. So I'm going to give a bit of a snapshot on what we're seeing to set the stage a bit for the discussions and the experiences that we'll hear today. So to start us off, and this is taken from the work of UNFC, a bit of an understanding of the relationship between NDC and LT-LEDs. Many of you may be familiar, the NDCs are mandatory every 5 years with a time frame up to 2030, have very specific guidance, as well as the review and tracking process. LT-LEDs, of course, are optional according to the decisions. Look at a mid-century timeline, which is not specifically defined, as well as a more broader scope in terms of what specific guidance there is on what an LT-LEDs would look like. And as a result, of course, countries are approaching the LT-LEDs work very differently and defining it based on the needs and the context in which they're sitting. Which again, as we see, the opportunity there is really to be able to leverage it to advance other development priorities and development planning. So here's just a snapshot of where things are on LT-LEDs. As of the 12th of November, 56 have been submitted, 28 by the end of 2020, and then 2021 additional 26, and then 9 in 2022. We do see that developed countries in particular have submitted more LT-LEDs overall, with 28 developing countries coming with 27. Although we are seeing with UNDP and the support that we provide, quite an increasing interest in engaging on LT-LEDs within developing countries, and I'll speak to that in a bit. In terms of the benefits of LT-LEDs, one of the things that we do see is that the challenges in developing countries is finding the finance, the resources, capacity to engage and develop. And I think what we try to advocate for and where we try to push is really seeing where those benefits are to advancing, again, the existing development priorities. So really looking at how we contribute to the policy coherence. So understanding how this long-term vision can help to advance and help propel more of the immediate and short-term planning. So looking at the relationship between NDCs, of course, and LTS, as well as other sectoral and development planning more in the immediate term. Also looking at supporting the whole of government approach. So engaging in this process really allows a platform for different actors across government and of course across society as well to be able to engage and define this longer term vision by which then the trajectory and the work of the various sectors and planning can convene. In terms of looking at identifying different pathways to maximize the socioeconomic and environmental benefits. So by going through this process, really identifying where the opportunities are in the longer term, how to avoid lock-in in certain sectors, and also look to where those opportunities are for advancing various job creation or other economic benefits as it's advanced. Facilitating finance and support with the vision set out, that also provides an opportunity for investors to see where and have more confidence in the direction that the country is going and provide an opportunity then to also come in and invest. And then also, again, linking between the mitigation and the resilience agendas. while this is not, specifically oriented around just the emissions reduction, really looking at where those resilience opportunities are and seeing where the co-benefits exist. Looking at what has come out of the latest synthesis report from UNFCCC, we do see that there is an increasing focus on linking up the LT-LEDs with the sustainable development planning. So we had the snapshot earlier from James in terms of where the submissions fit, 83% of global GDP, 47% of global population. We also see that all LT-LEDs really provide a clear development perspective, integrating climate change into the different objectives and with the development visions of the country. About half of LT-LEDs indicate a close linkage between the LT-LEDs and the national development plans. So that's definitely a strong signal. But of course, there's more work that could be done in helping to bring those two agendas and processes together. We do see quite a majority of countries really referring to linkages with the SDGs, and again, using that as another kind of guidepost for designing this vision. And then almost all LT-LEDs also consider the different synergies and trade-offs between the development priorities, emission reduction, and adaptation. And again, that's part of the what we see as really the benefits of this process, is to be able to dive into what those synergies and those trade-offs really are. So what I'll reflect on now is a bit on the experience that we've seen through UNDP's support. And this is based on, as was mentioned, the UNDP Climate Promise portfolio. This is UNDP's flagship corporate initiative to support countries to implement the Paris Agreement, with a strong focus on NDCs, as well as increasingly more on LT-LEDs. It was launched in 2019 with the aim to support countries to enhance their NDCs ahead of COP26. We've now supported 105 countries to submit their NDCs and are increasingly shifting to looking towards implementation, as well as this strong link between aligning the NDCs with the LT-LEDs process. And that's really where a lot of this experience comes, which I'll speak to now. So where are those challenges and where are the opportunities in the various engagements and portfolios that we're working with? We see that there's, of course, a need for ensuring that the national ownership in country is really driving this agenda. Again, this is meant to be a process that sets the vision for the country. So if you don't have that ownership, if you don't have the buy-in from across government, it really undermines the process and doesn't allow for it to reach the benefits that we mentioned. Again, alignment between the NDC and LT-LEDs, really allowing the NDCs to become that kind of a milestone throughout the process to be able to reach that long-term goal, and using the vision of the LT-LEDs to guide the continuous ratcheting up and enhancements of the NDCs is also particularly important, and something that has been a challenge in some countries. The whole of government approach, as I mentioned before, bringing all stakeholders together. And I would add also the whole of society approach as well, making sure that other actors outside government are engaged and are helping to set that agenda based on those experiences and priorities. Strengthening the national capacity in countries. This is, of course, as I mentioned, a big challenge in many of the partner countries where we work, where there is limited capacity, there is limited resources to focus on these planning processes. And while we saw many countries really focused on the NDC process over the last couple of years, it was hard to in addition, add, engage in the LTS. And so really looking at how those processes can link up and really help each other to advance is really critical. The key question, which I think I assume will come up throughout the panel today, is about the data availability, the data access, having up-to-date information, which of course is very critical in order to be able to set this vision and set the pathway by which the various pieces can fall. And then, of course, finance and technical support really needed to underpin, and that's not just the planning process, which is something that we've seen, but also once the vision is in place, how do you crowd in the investment that's really needed to realize that vision? Because the vision is only as helpful as it is implemented. So as I mentioned, UNDP has been supporting countries. We supported over 20 countries to date on their long-term planning. The type of support is addressing a lot of those challenges and needs that I just mentioned, a lot on capacity building, modeling, exploring various policy landscapes through various assessments and looking at linkages with various development priorities, tracking mechanisms, as well as assessing the various socioeconomic impacts through the long-term path. And again, really taking the perspective of how does this LEDS process really contribute to long-term development planning, and how does this build on some of the existing assessments and processes that are ongoing, whether it's through NDCs, whether it's through national communications and inventories, whether it's through other sectoral planning processes and assessments, really trying to embed this within what's already happening in country and not create something that's in a silo. One of the key issues that we've seen come out, and I'm sure you've all heard this throughout the days here in Sharm el-Sheikh, the issue of just transition. And this is something that is increasingly coming onto the agenda in countries trying to figure out what does that mean, what does it look like in our context. You can see here, we just published a report on LEDS, understanding the experiences from the portfolio that we've been supporting, and you can see the relationship between just transition and NDCs and LEDS. And in this figure on the left, you see that a majority of, you have about 74 countries that reference just transition in their NDC. And another about 60 or 55 countries that reference in their LEDS. And there seems to be, there's a small piece there where it's actually referenced in both, and it's being addressed both at the short term and the longer term. And so this is something that I think there's opportunity for definitely advancing and really understanding how do we land this idea of just transition? What does it look like in the context of both short-term and longer-term pathways? And how do we bring that into and leverage the planning processes that are ongoing? So just to finish up, a few key takeaways from this kind of scene setting, this experience. You definitely see the increasing interest from developing countries to accelerate this process, not just in the planning, but also looking at the implementation process and the tracking process. But as I mentioned, the challenges being the limited resources or the limited support, technical support, and so on to advance that process. Understanding that LEDS is not a standalone process, really it's an opportunity to advance the other long-term development visions, giving a space and a platform to engage all actors, both within government and outside of government. Again, aligning with the NDCs, providing that longer-term path for the NDCs to then ratchet up to meet that vision, and really help to provide that platform through the continuous NDC revision and implementation processes. And then finally, as LEDS become an opportunity to send a signal on where each country plans to lead and where their trajectories will go. Really providing an opportunity and impacting the investment that then comes into the country, and how that can help inform the various sectoral and development processes that then allow to reach that aim of the long-term vision. So with that, I will stop there, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for sharing with us a presentation which is very much in time, very much of an opportune agenda. Now, let me move to panel discussion. I would like to turn over our moderator, Richard Barron, Executive Director of 2050 Pathways Platform. The 2050 Pathways Platform is a multi-stakeholder initiative launched at COP22 by then high-level climate champion and an architect of the Paris Agreement, Laurence Tubiana. It was established at the request of the countries who wanted a big tent approach to 2050 long-term climate strategies. In addition to countries, it brings together a network of bilateral and multilateral donors, international national think tanks, and climate policy experts with an interest in long-term planning in response to the climate challenges. In addition, we have 4 speakers from United Arab Emirates, His Excellency Asa Al-Hashimi, Assistant Undersecretary, Sustainable Communities Sector, and Acting Assistant Undersecretary, Green Development and Climate Challenges Sector. UAE not only takes over the role of COP28 presidency, but also submitted updated NDCs this September, in which the government commit to submit long-term strategies and further updated NDCs next year. From Gambia, Mr. Alpha A.K. Jallow, Director, Department of Water Resources. Gambia submitted its long-term strategies this September. It is one of the 5 African countries, together with Morocco, Tunisia, Nigeria, and South Africa, who submitted long-term strategies. From Turkey, we have Mr. Nuri Ozbagdali, Climate Change and Environment Portfolio Manager of UNDP. Let me now turn over to Richard to start the panel discussion. Thank you. Richard, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and big thank you to the UNFCCC for convening that event, and an even bigger thank you for the UNFCCC synthesis reports on long-term strategies. There were some summaries that were made here. I think to do justice to it, there's a lot of policy insights, and I encourage everyone to read them. One that I thought was particularly interesting because it touches on this question of alignment between long-term strategies, the net zero ambition, and NDCs, and that is that most long-term strategies to date take the 2030 NDC point as the milestone for that date, and then bring all the efforts down after 2050. And I think one message we have seen from some of the work of some countries on this is that actually the efforts need to start earlier, and you need to raise the ambition of the NDCs to actually stay on track with that. You cannot just think that 20 years after that we're going to be able to turn things around that rapidly. But that's one of the many things that are super important in that report. I think James Grabert and Jennifer Baumwell also alluded to this huge challenge that we have of policy coherence and bringing this all of government and all of society. This is aspired to in the LTS, and we support countries to do that. We know how much of a challenge it is, but we need to keep pushing in this direction. So without further ado, and taking time away from our panelists, and first an apology for the all-man panel, but Jennifer is still with us here, so great. We were looking forward to hear from Emma as well, but unfortunately she couldn't come. So without further ado, let me give the floor to His Excellency Asa Al-Hashimi for experience to date from the Emirates. You have the floor.
Well, thank you very much for hosting us today, and I also want to express my appreciation to the UNFCCC for inviting us and allowing us to share our expertise when it comes to developing the net zero strategy and the low emissions long-term development strategies. And in the UAE, we started this journey back in 2015 when we started with our INDC. At that stage, we looked at the most critical component in decarbonization, which is the energy sector. So we looked at the aspects where the most emissions are produced, and we had a target to move to clean energy and contribute about 24% of our emissions. Later on, we adopted in our second NDC a whole of economy approach and targeted a reduction of 23.5% of our emissions. Now, our latest NDC also aligns with those targets and actually looks at reducing about 31% of our emissions. Recently, just about a couple of days ago, last Friday, we have announced the national net zero by 2050 pathway, which sets up a target of absolute emission reduction of 18% from a base year of 2019. This specific base year is the most recent one, so it's kind of puts a lot of challenge on the government to actually reduce its emission and move toward net zero. Now, in order for us to better understand the context of setting up such a strategy, we need to understand that this strategy is an evolving document. It won't start immediately. We need to build the blocks in order for us to be able to set up such a strategy. So in the UAE, we have 3 advocates for net zero strategy. The first one is a nationwide sort of dialogue that takes place on a monthly basis. This is referred to as the National Dialogue for Climate Ambition. And in here, the government sets up a monthly convention with all relevant stakeholders from a specific industry in order to discuss with them the possibility of decarbonization and what are the opportunities that it brings, and also taking feedback on how we can remove obstacles and allow the industry to move toward net zero. Our second advocate is that we have a Climate Change Council, which represents every single local emirate or a city that we have in the UAE, as well as the federal government and the representative of the private sector. That specific council will set up plans and monitor the progress of achieving decarbonization on a national level. Now, in order for us to move toward this very high, ambitious plan, we had to actually have the political will to support us in order to implement this. And we are very proud to say that since last year or since COP26, we were able to form a national committee to review all our emission profile at multiple sectors and to come up with a workable pathway. Now, in order for us to achieve that pathway, we have set up on 4 principles. The first principle is the fact that we need international alignment, so we need to achieve Paris Agreement goals. We need to achieve the SDG goals, which is relevant to climate change, Goal 13 specifically. We also need to know that the second principle is the fact that we need to gain as much as possible from decarbonization, not only including better quality of life, achieving better quality of life, but also better socio-economical benefits as well as environmental benefits. The third principle is the fact that we need to produce a workable solution, a world-leading workable solution in this area. So it shouldn't be just a plan, it should be something that we can implement and achieve. Actually, the last element that we have is the fact that we also, in this specific plan, we need to accelerate the efforts that we are implementing in this plan. From the lessons learned that we have looked at through developing this specific strategy is the fact that we need to focus on 2 critical aspects. The first one is there are many net positive cases for decarbonization, and we need to accelerate those as much as possible, setting up the right ecosystem for them to be implemented. Just looking at the last few months, and due to the unforeseen rises in fuel prices, we have seen a major shift on the national level to EVs, and we need to capitalize on such things and accelerate the efforts in this area. The second aspect is that we need to take a timely intervention when technology is ready, specifically when things are relevant to the industry, in order for us to reduce the emissions as well as sustain the businesses around this area. With all those being said, the strategy, the long-term net zero strategy of the UAE will bring many benefits. We are looking at sustaining jobs and creating new jobs of about 200,000 jobs until 2050, we are looking at enhanced GDP growth of 3%, which equates to $100 billion. We are also looking at the fact that we will have enhanced air quality and quality of life. And finally, it will solidify the efforts of exporting and producing green products, in which we are focusing on new industries, emerging industries such as the production of hydrogen and also green aluminum. All those has been prepared in an all-inclusive way, and I would like to conclude with the fact that when developing such strategy, there is no one solution that fits all. You need to better understand your existing environment, your capabilities, and use those principles as much as possible. And thank you all for choosing us.
Thank you very much. And let me stress maybe some important point. You are being very reactive, obviously, to the change in the international setting, and there are a lot of countries whose trade and activities heavily depends on how fast this transition is going to go. And I should stress that it is one element that most long-term strategies do not touch on. They seem to look at a development that is inward-looking because it's technically complicated to do that. But other countries like UAE don't have that luxury. You have to look at the international setting, and I think it sets a good example for other countries to follow through. I also heard a lot about rethinking the industrial strategy and the co-benefits, and taking things on in a way that is positive for the country. So thank you very much for that example. Let me now shift the floor to Alpha Jallo from the Gambia. Very happy to have you with us and speak to your own experience. You have the floor now.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you, moderator. But first, I would like a correction on the title. I'll let the Secretariat take up that. I'm the Director of Climate Change Secretariat at the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change, and Natural Resources. I'm not at the department. Yeah.
You need to speak closer to the microphone because we can't hear you from here.
Okay, I said I'm the Director of the Climate Change Secretariat at the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change, and Natural Resources, and not the Department of Water Resources. First, sharing our experience, we started a bit far away. In 2016, we had a climate change policy, and that climate change policy was looking at four focus areas. That is climate resilient food and landscape, then low emission and resilient economy, climate resilient people, and managing our coastline. So these are the first focus areas that the policy was looking at. So after the policy, we moved forward and developed a low emission climate resilient development strategy. We call it LECAT, and it was in support of UNDP. We developed this policy, this strategic document. This strategic document also was looking at the options that could be available to reduce our emissions, and also the options that could be available for adapting to climate change. So basically, it includes these two areas, adaptation and mitigation, but more focus on the emission side. Then in 2018, 2019 to 2020, we developed our climate change vision. And the climate change vision was based on these documents. We also had in 2017 what we call the SPCR, that is a strategic program for climate resilience. So these two documents, we are combined together to be aligned and make sure that the vision capture this, especially the policy, because this four focus of the policy, we are the four focus of the vision. The vision was based on these four focus areas, and it was developed and submitted also to the UNFCCC Secretariat. But now, how to implement our vision, which is just an aim of where we are and where we want to be by 2050. Then with the support from the 2050 pathway that you are aware of, we developed our climate change strategy. The strategy also combine all these documents together, the policy, the LECAT, and the vision up to 2050. And the NDC, which is, I did not mention, was also submitted in 2020, which is up to 2030. But our NDC, instead of having two timelines, this time we only have one timeline, which is up 2030, and with a target of a reduction of 49.7% by 2030 compared to our 1990 emissions. So we developed the strategy with looking at all these documents and with further consultations with sectors and communities to have a very rigorous and long-lasting strategy that will capture all of this. And then to help us furthermore, it coincided with the preparation to develop our National Development Plan. With its review, and its development. And we ensure that these two are aligned. What is in the long-term strategy is also factored in the National Development Plan. And this will ensure that we have complementarity of our climate initiative, and it will also avoid to have duplication. So what is undertaken in one area would not be taken in the other in the implementation of another policy document. That is in implementing the long-term development plan, we will be looking at what is in the LTS that could be factored in it and its implementation. And in implementing the NDC, already we had the long-term strategy up to 2050, which covered the NDC. Because in our long-term strategy, we have an emission and economic analysis. And this emission and economic analysis look further than what was in the NDC during the preparation of the NDC, and with it came with option and cost. So this is the experience that we use. It's a bit of a broad experience which started from 2017 up to 2022 now when we have our LDC. So we have several documents that we put together, and we make sure that they are communicating to each other, and we make sure that they are complementary to each other, and that will avoid duplication. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alpha Jallo, and it's commendable that there is such great effort that goes into homogenizing the various plans and bring them all together. I think it's a problem that we have seen in the past of countries actually developing strategies over strategies and putting a lot of their brains into this and a lot of expertise, but unfortunately not being turned towards something that is concrete and works for all the parties involved. So we were very happy to be able to support you in that effort, and look really forward to doing more with cooperation of development partners, including UNDP, hopefully. Speaking of UNDP, next on the panel is from Turkey, Nuri Özbagdatli. Nuri, if you could tell us a little bit about the experience of Turkey now in the development of its LEDS. You have the floor.
Thanks a lot, Richard. As you may know, Turkey is ratified the Paris Agreement through the end of 2021, and especially provided the INDC in 2015. So just starting from the beginning of this year, Turkey is really focusing on the consultation among all the parties, and in February, first ever Climate Council meeting was organized. And since UNDP has been working with government of Turkey since 1950s, we have a very close and trust-based partnership focusing on several dimensions of climate change. It is not only the environment, but also economic and social part. And UNDP's Global Climate Promise program has actually been a very important platform to improve the project-related and multidimensional climate actions, which took us in a close partnership for Turkey to prepare an long-term strategy directly linked with the economic-based model on the NDC, but also national development planning. And key part here is about the UNDP's role to provide the technical information and fact-based, science-based decision-making process to show how the whole society approach can be improved during this long-term strategy, and how the balance between the dimensions of the sustainable development goal while reaching the 2053 net zero target of Turkey. And here we see that long-term strategy is a very important tool to increase the opportunities and avoiding actually transforming challenges to the new opportunities. And here we work on an economic model showing what would be the job shifts, showing what would be the youth employment, and how the role of youth and women would be increased, while the resilience of the cities and ecosystem combined together, and also how the natural process and ecosystem-based approach can be integrated. And now the long-term strategy is planned to be finalized and announced next year, mid of next year. And we already provided our support to government of Turkey in terms of the NDC-related studies, all the economic models and everything. And we expect that government of Turkey will announce an NDC which is linked with the long-term strategy. And I think it is highly important to highlight that the interest of the whole society for this long-term strategy is very high in Turkey. I mean, when you see that the people on the streets are talking about climate change, and private sector, especially private sector, is talking about an ambitious NDC and a clear long-term strategy. And one of the reasons is that as a candidate EU member, membership of government of Turkey, there is the EU Green Deal and linked with the carbon border adjustment mechanism, where the private sector needs to be ready because Turkey's exports are mainly to the EU countries. But also NGOs and academia are starting to take their role mainly on how to provide the just and also quick transition for different stakeholders. Here I also would like to highlight what the experience for ourselves from Turkey is about the role of the municipalities. So now with this whole process, especially after the clear target of 2050 net zero target, the municipalities are started to change their role rather than focusing on the municipal services, but they now focus on how to take lead in terms also finance. And all this development is also increase an interest from the multi-development banks and IFIs. So there is an ongoing process about the financing of this transition to new climate neutral and green economy for Turkey. And actually long-term strategy provides a clear process for all the expectations, where there is the multi-development banks, where there is the private sector, NGOs, and other whole society dimensions. And UNDP is actually taking a role to convey a table where all the different stakeholders can come together and really experience the multilateral decision making and really talking all the segments of this complex situation and project a feature which is understandable, which is acceptable, and which is possible to take a role to shape the Turkey's development pathway. So we are very happy to work at the country level, but UNDP has this unique structure where the country level works directly with the global level, what Jenny has been doing, and we can not only prototype the solutions, but also we can demonstrate it and deploy it at scale. So we are very happy to work with the government of Turkey, with non-state of parties where the private sector NGOs are key, And we are looking forward to increase this, knowledge sharing and experience sharing among the countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and yes, and in particular for announcing what we all look forward, which is another G20 country putting its long-term strategy to the table. I think you stressed also the dimension of the international trade and how that is also a motivation for action. So I think this international dimension came through with both your and the UAE presentation just now. And stressing also how you take the broader picture on jobs and the encouragement to participate by municipalities and regional governments. I'd like to ask now a question to all of you, including to Jennifer, but maybe starting from you, Mr. El Hashimi. When you think about the development of that long-term strategy, I think Jennifer Baumol was actually indicating a number of challenges that we've seen across countries, but what is the challenge that you think, the one that keeps you maybe awake at night, or the one that comes first when you wake up in the morning and saying, oh, on the LEDS, I need to do this. So very happy to hear what you think is the challenge that you have to overcome first and foremost to be able to do a good job on this.
Well, thank you. There are, I think, many challenges, but the most important one, or the one that I see is very critical, is the fact that there is a misconception of the fact that net zero or decarbonization might be a factor that could drive your business out, or that you can drive you out of your business and create some sort of a losses. And this is where whenever we had the discussion with industries, they keep on saying, what about my competitiveness? What about my ability to sell? What about my ability to flourish as a business? And this is where I think the national dialogues and the conventions has started to show that there is a different ways of doing this, and there is always a way that could create a win-win situation with everybody. And this is where we have started to demonstrate that there are positive business cases for decarbonization, and there are measures that could actually save you, that could help you in decarbonize and either save cost or create additional economic viability. And this is where it started to open doors, and people started to have dialogues and explore ideas. So I think the critical thing is the conceptual understanding of net zero, and whether it is, we'd say, the elephant in the room, or is it actually the opportunity that we need to look at.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jallo, so what is the challenge that you think of when you think about the long-term strategy of the Gambia?
The challenge is in the implementation or during the preparation? Okay, well, all right. So I will answer both. During the preparation, we don't have much challenges because of funding was assured and secured. The only challenge was trying to gather and collect data, especially essential data and information that will feed into the preparation of a robust and informative LTS. Now, when it comes to implementation is where the challenge is, because of our current assessment and budgeting or costing of the LTS is about $4 billion US dollars at today's price. And how can we get that funding? It's a challenge. And then how far can we transit into net zero emissions? That's a challenge, but the key areas that we are looking into for transitioning is for just transition is in the investment in the renewable area, because currently we have a joint regional initiative. It's a hydro dam that is shared with Senegal, Guinea-Conakry, Guinea-Bissau, and the Gambia, and we are getting a good if it is finalized, we are expecting to get about 150 megawatts of electricity So if we can add also solar into it, the National Electricity Company is building a 20 megawatt, and then with NAMA we are going to get a 10.2 kilowatts of energy, and it's a potential area that we thought that we can exploit further to reduce our dependency on fossil fuel to generate electricity, because all combined, if you can get about 200 megawatts of renewables, that is the hydroelectricity combined with the solar energy, that at least I think we can switch off all our generators and depend only on solar. So, but it needs time, it needs investment, so it's where our challenge is in attending just a transition towards 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I now turn to Nuri Özbagetatli, please?
I think the main challenge is unclarity, and unclarity itself. So the experience that the Russian invasion, I mean, how we could, wait for the impact to energy sector and food sector. And while the countries are preparing the long-term strategies, we actually should be prepared for surprises. Yes, we can manage the risks, but we cannot manage the uncertainties. We need to detail it, understand it. And I think the other main challenge is actually ourselves. So we should believe, and we should commit on to the political target, but need to be open to discussion, better communication. And here I think the key word is multilateralism. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer, can I ask you if you want to reflect on what you heard, or? Please go ahead.
Sure, happy to. No, I think it's again interesting to see how the process and the kind of mandate lands. Is that better? It's interesting to hear how the process lands in different countries, and how again the various contexts is shaping really what the process looks like, and how it's contributing to what the other various processes are that are happening. I think, as you were saying, this idea of uncertainty and dealing with the not just domestically but the impacts that are coming from outside, that is a very unique challenge to a longer term process, right? It also takes into account that you have many political cycles that are part of a longer term process. So there's all of these various uncertainties built in by nature, and it's I think that challenge is definitely something unique, and ensuring that that's building on some of the processes that can kind of build up to that, right? The speaking to the near term or the immediate planning, and vice versa, I think can help to get there.
Thank you. Another question that relates to the long-term strategy, but to many other things, and has been a theme for a few years now, and that is just transition. So when you look at the long-term shift to a more climate resilient and low carbon economy, what are the most immediate just transition issues that come to mind in terms of sectors, in terms of ministries that need to be engaged? What are the ones that are really pressing for your respective economy?
So in our case, I think when we look at decarbonization and the way that the just transition, with the just transition being at the core of it, I think the critical element is the fact that we need to align the just transition with the availability and maturity of the relevant technology that will enable us to achieve that specific target. So among the many difficult discussions that we had during forming our strategy is the fact that we have so many stakeholders, for example, in the energy sector, and every single industry believes that their technology is more advanced than others. So when we look at, for example, reactors and peaceful nuclear, they believe that their technology is evolving, and they are the future in decarbonization. When we look at service providers and utility providers, they look at cost, bottom line cost, and they look at renewable energy such as solar. but there are so many stakeholders that has constraints. When we look at distributors, they talk about grid ability and enhancing the grid to cater for such fluctuating load and so on. So the just transition in our case will definitely reflect on the availability and maturity of the technologies to support such things. So if we were looking at decarbonization, the UAE, we'd be looking at those two elements. The availability of the technologies and accessibility to that technology, the maturity of that specific technology, and the bottom line is that it needs to have economical viability in order for this to continue over in a sustainable fashion. Thanks.
Just to pick up on that, are there any skills issues that you see in that context?
Yes, I think skills and upskilling and reskilling is a major factor. So when we look at actually job creation, we look at retained jobs as well as the new created jobs. And with retained jobs, there will be so many things that needs upskilling and reskillings. And specifically in the different manufacturing industry as well as energy. And with that being said, there needs to be some sort of a capacity building program that is built into the plan. But it's again with planning so much far ahead, there are so many uncertainties that comes into the picture, and we need to better understand the triggers of when that technology might be the one that we need to choose, and then follow on those elements. So we are trying now to figure those touch points. So when such things happen, then we will be able to build on it and then decide on that specific technology. Now, in the strategy itself, technologies are defined and targets are defined, but again, this is a long-term strategy, and we expect that it would be revamped over time. So we need to understand those dynamics.
Thank you very much. Can I turn to the Gambia now to say, how do you look at the issue of just transition in the broader economic development agenda that you have ahead of ourselves, but also the low carbon development and the climate resilience? Are there any specific sectors that come to mind as being challenged in that context, and jobs?
Okay, thank you. What is important here is that some of our key pressing socio-economic issues are unemployment, issues of poverty reduction, issues of food security, and access to energy. Then as the population is growing and more people are requesting for energy due to new settlement, then this increases the need for access to energy. But now, within the just transition and what we had in place from the NDC and from the LTS is to develop more on renewables, and that we are looking at how we can engage the youth to get more employment on the side of capacity, on how they can install renewables within institutions and homes. Already there's an association we call the Fandema Ombolo Association, and they are very good in that. They have youths, especially girls, whom they are training on how to install solar, and also on how to do other skills that are related to self-employment. And I think it's a better way that we can build on such initiative going forward in the implementation of our LTS with regards to just transition. When it comes to food resilience and also adaptation, we have a project called that's a rural integration climate and climate resilience in the provinces in the eastern side of the country. And there's another project under UNCDF, we call it local, and that they are working with communities at the ward level and ensure that they have the skills, they have the jobs, and they have the finance. And it is called JSP, the skills, jobs, and finance. So what it will involve is that the community themselves will identify what they want to do. If it is constructing a garden or repairing a road, then the project will finance it through a partnership with a microfinance institution, whereby the community will have an account and signatures of 3 or 4 people. Then the funds will be transferred to them to do the job, and then within doing the job itself, they have skills. And then by paying themselves on the labor, they also have finances. And from the proceeds, they can pay school fees for their children, they can buy food for their own families, and it's a method we thought we can replicate it in other projects, and that's why when this RICA came, Rural Adaptation and Resilience Project, we targeted another 2 communities in the rural areas, so that we will learn from the local project and try to see how we can engage the public to do it, so that the community to do it, so that they will build their resilience and ensure that much of climate finance is reaching them. And within that project also we have an insurance scheme whereby farmers will be insured gradually. The premium will be reducing gradually as the project is ending, so that if there's a disaster or a drought or long drought spell whereby crops are doing bad, so they could be compensated from that. But I think in implementing our LTS and moving towards just transition, we'll be looking at unemployment, we'll be looking at food security issues, and also at resilience of the communities, and ensuring that climate finance is reaching them. And to help us, I think we will be working with institutions that are at that level of, and we could be qualified to have direct access entity with either the GCF or other financial mechanisms, so that we will avoid the medium of climate finance going through other entities whereby 10% of it will be will be remaining with them. It's only 90%, even that 90%, another 10% will be also with the delivery partner, and at the end, only 50% is reaching the community. So we want to do something away with that as business unusual. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for linking this to very precise sectoral realities in your countries. I think there is also a link to technology that's interesting in both your remarks on how to anticipate this, but you're already bringing solutions because they are part of the practical solutions that you're bringing to the problems you have today and not just to the long-term problems. So we look forward to hear more of the same. Do you want to come back to this, or no? Go ahead.
Actually, this year UN Secretary General discussed about the, how the climate change is a human rights issue. And this year there is the UN resolution that living in a secure and healthy environment is a human rights issue. So actually now the meaning of just transition has been evolving. And it is very important that when we talk about just transition, we are talking about mainly, vulnerable groups and young and women. But, when we discuss the role of youth, we always think that it is for future. But actually youth says, no, it is now today. So they want to take role as of today. So I think one of the key issues about this involvement of youth, and mainly is about the employment. So if a country, especially in Turkey, we go for 2053 net zero target, then it means that there is a transition and the job shift and the job loss and job gain. So it is important how the skills are prepared for this, how the private sector is prepared for this, and how this employment is actually is changed within this new mindsetting. And also critically important that Turkey is, for example, earthquake-prone country. And there are more than 5 million refugees in the country. And there is a always changing landscape within the region. So it is very important for countries to understand how these uncertainties link with their sustainable development pathway, and especially the understanding the resilience within the just transition is very key for preparedness. So if the society is prepared, if the private sector is prepared, then the role of government is fairly easier in terms of the regulations. So I think the key issue is about the skills and employment, but also looking from the new perspective of the just transition, involvement of the human rights, and mainly especially at the sectoral level for the resilience, yes, adaptation, but health is very important at that point. So I can summarize in a very short like that. Thank you.
No, thank you for pointing out that just transition is not a unidimensional element, that there are many aspects to this, and yeah, being just is also being just to the generation today that's going to have to go through this in the next 30 years or suffer the consequences, so clearly very important. Can I ask you, Jennifer, maybe to close? We have 3 minutes left, and so I'd be happy to hear you. Mr. Jallo, did you want to come back, or? No, okay. Jennifer, if you want to reflect on just that aspect, and then we'll close the debate. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. No, I think it's quite interesting to hear the reflections on your question on just transition. I think we hear a lot about just transition in the context of energy sector. And that's, when we did the analysis on where just transition is referenced in NDCs and LEDS, it's primarily in energy sector. A majority is referenced. But when you hear it, in terms of how it's actually affecting countries and various sectors, it's not just about energy. And in fact, a lot of other sectors, agriculture, tourism, that are very, dependent, countries are dependent on, will be directly impacted. And understanding how those conversations happen in those sectors, I think is particularly interesting. So yeah, when it comes to just transition, definitely the LEDS process is again a platform, a vehicle to start to unpack that and understand what it actually means in that local context and who's affected and why. And again, ensuring that that's a multi-stakeholder process, of course, is essential to further defining it. So.
Thank you very much for those very wise words in closing. I think it's about time. You've been very patient waiting for the late start, but I'd like to give our panel a big round of applause for sticking with us and sharing their views. These were actually a lot of new things for myself, and I've been working on this for some time, so thank you very much.